October 30th, 2012. Longview Lake, Missouri. A beige minivan sat alone in the parking lot. It wasn't unusual for cars to be there overnight, but this one felt different. The windows were fogged from the inside. No movement, no sound, just stillness. When officers approached the vehicle, they noticed something unsettling. A woman was inside. She wasn't slumped over the steering wheel. She wasn't in the back seat. She was lying down, as if she had prepared herself. Her name was Bethany Deaton. She was 27 years old, a newlywed, a devout believer, and according to the first assumption, Inside the van, there was a note. Typed, structured, clear. It described emotional suffering, spiritual guilt, a belief that she deserved punishment. The doors were locked. There were no visible signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, no immediate evidence of foul play. Case closed. That's what it looked like. But this wasn't just a woman alone in a van. This was the quiet collapse of something much darker. Because Bethany wasn't isolated. She belonged to a tight religious community, a group bound by shared confession, shared guilt, shared control. And at the center of that group was her husband, Tyler Deaton, charismatic, soft-spoken, spiritually intense, the kind of man people followed without question. At first glance, everything about this tragedy appeared self-inflicted. But when investigators began asking questions, the story started to fracture, and beneath the surface of faith and devotion, they found fear, silence, and influence. This wasn't going to be a simple investigation. This was going to unravel something no one expected. And it all began with a van, alone, at the edge of a quiet lake. Before she was a headline, Bethany was a believer. She grew up deeply rooted in faith, structured church life, scripture, discipline. She wasn't rebellious. She wasn't reckless. She was searching for meaning, searching for purpose, searching for someone who could explain the doubts inside her. In college, she met a group that seemed to offer exactly that. Young, passionate, intense. They met for prayer, for confession, for emotional accountability. They believed in radical honesty. Nothing hidden, nothing buried. Every thought exposed. And leading these sessions was Tyler. He didn't shout. He didn't dominate the room. He listened. Soft voice, calm presence. But when he spoke, everyone leaned in. He talked about purity, about spiritual warfare, about hidden sin destroying the soul. He encouraged public confession, deep confession, private shame brought into the light. At first, it felt freeing, cathartic, healing, but over time, it became something else. Members began confessing intrusive thoughts, sexual doubts, dark impulses they didn't fully understand. And instead of easing guilt, the confessions amplified it, especially for Bethany. She internalized everything. Every doubt became proof she was flawed. Every struggle became evidence she was spiritually broken. And the more she confessed, the more she believed she needed guidance, needed correction, needed Tyler. That dependency would grow, and eventually, it would define her entire world. Tyler Deaton did not look dangerous. He wasn't loud. He wasn't aggressive. He was composed, measured, soft. But influence doesn't always arrive with force. Sometimes it arrives gently. Tyler became the emotional center of the group. Confessions ran through him. Secrets passed through him. Pain was filtered through him. And slowly, authority formed. He spoke about spiritual attack, about hidden corruption, about impure thoughts being signs of deep moral decay. If someone struggled, it wasn't normal. It was sin. If someone doubted, it wasn't confusion. It was rebellion. The group began separating from outsiders. Family didn't understand them. Churches weren't spiritually intense enough. The world was dangerous. Only the group was safe. Only the group understood truth. Only Tyler could interpret it correctly. Bethany absorbed this completely. She admired him, trusted him, believed he saw things others couldn't. When he said someone needed correction, they accepted it. When he said someone needed discipline, they complied. And then something unexpected happened. Tyler announced that he and Bethany would marry. It wasn't described as romance. It was described as divine alignment, God's will, a spiritual union. The group celebrated it. But privately, some wondered if it felt rushed. Bethany seemed nervous. Tyler seemed distant. But no one questioned leadership. Questioning meant doubt. And doubt meant weakness. So the wedding happened. Smiles, photos, blessings. But behind closed doors, the marriage was already unraveling. The honeymoon never felt like one. There was distance, emotional coldness. Reports later suggested the marriage was never physically consummated. Tyler confessed to the group that he struggled with same-sex attraction. He described it as temptation, as spiritual warfare, as something to fight. And instead of stepping back from leadership, the group leaned in closer. Confession became more intense, more graphic, more invasive. Members described private thoughts in detail. They sought correction. They sought absolution. Bethany was drowning in guilt. She believed she was spiritually corrupt. She believed her thoughts were evil. She believed she deserved punishment. Tyler reinforced the idea that suffering could purify, that pain could cleanse. That confession must be complete, absolute, total. Bethany began writing letters. Letters describing self-hatred. Letters describing fear of harming others. Letters describing herself as dangerous. But investigators later found no evidence she had harmed anyone. Only evidence that she believed she might. That belief didn't grow naturally. It was cultivated, repeated, confirmed by the group dynamic, by constant scrutiny, by psychological pressure disguised as spiritual care. She wasn't physically restrained, but emotionally, she was trapped. And when someone believes they are fundamentally broken, they stop looking for escape. They start looking for punishment. In the weeks before her death, Bethany's behavior changed. She seemed exhausted, detached, consumed by shame. She admitted herself briefly to a psychiatric facility. Doctors evaluated her. But the deeper context, the group, the confessions, the pressure, remained largely invisible. She returned home, returned to the community, returned to the same cycle. Then came October 30th. She drove to Longview Lake, alone. She brought medication, She typed a note. Structured. Clear. Calm. Too calm. That's what some later said. As if she had accepted a verdict. As if she had been convinced that this was the necessary outcome. When police first ruled it a suicide, the case almost ended there. But then, everything changed. Because weeks later, another member of the group walked into a police station and confessed to murder. Micah Moore was shaking when he confessed. He told investigators that Tyler had manipulated them, that the group believed Bethany was spiritually dangerous, that she needed to die. He claimed he suffocated her inside the van. The story exploded. Media descended. Occult murder. A spiritual leader. A coordinated killing. Tyler immediately left town. He checked himself into a mental health facility. Public suspicion intensified. Was this a suicide? Or a ritualized execution disguised as one? Investigators reopened everything. Autopsy details were re-examined. Forensics reprocessed. Vehicle analysis repeated. And then, the confession began to collapse. There were no defensive wounds. No foreign DNA. No physical evidence of suffocation. Micah's timeline didn't align with phone records. Surveillance contradicted parts of his statement. Under pressure, he admitted something shocking. He had lied. He wasn't covering up a murder. He was protecting Tyler. He believed that if he took the blame, he could absorb the punishment. A false confession, born from loyalty, from guilt, from control. Charges were eventually dropped. The case returned to its original ruling. Suicide. Officially. But officially doesn't always mean completely. No one was convicted. No one was charged with homicide. But the psychological landscape tells a heavier story. Bethany believed she deserved to die. That belief did not appear in isolation. It grew inside a controlled emotional system, a system built on shame, confession, hierarchy, authority. Tyler was never charged with murder, but his influence over the group became undeniable. Members later described manipulation, control, spiritual coercion. The law could not prove homicide, but it revealed something equally disturbing. A person can be pushed without being touched. They can be guided toward destruction without visible force. That's what makes this case linger. Not the van, not the lake, but the idea that belief, when distorted, can quietly dismantle someone from the inside. Bethany Deaton in a locked vehicle, alone, but the forces surrounding her were anything but empty. And that's what keeps this story alive. Because sometimes the most twisted cases don't end with a killer behind bars. They end with a question. How much influence is too much? And when does guidance become control?